Hey guys, so this is my post-mortem video for my gameplay prototyping module for the game Down. So the initial design was to create a simple platforming game with mobile in mind with a singular goal, go down. I decided to do a mobile game because I've never done it before, so I thought it would be as good a time as any to start and learn. As for the platformer element, I felt that platformers are kind of underrepresented in the mobile market. We have loads of match-free games, strategy, or endless runners, but we don't really have many pure platformers, at least in the top charts. So this prototype essentially aims to explore a platformer's viability in the mobile market and what kind of controls or gameplay elements would actually work for mobile. So for the control scheme, I chose a very simple control scheme. Similar to one-button games, we don't have any joysticks or joypads or anything. We just have a tap to jump and tilt using the phone's accelerometer to move around. As for the gameplay aspects, I wanted to mainly explore key movement features or abilities that we see in platformers and see how we would translate that into mobile and how well it translates into mobile. So I chose to do free because that would give me a good base number of scenarios that we could see. So the first power-up I decided to do was a parachute. So the reason I chose this was so we could see how well the phone's tilting mechanics could do in a game where you would have to dodge obstacles. The second power-up for this project was player spikes, essentially kind of climbing spikes attached to the player, which allows the player to wall jump and wall drag. And I chose this because I wanted to see if the actual idea of wall jumping and having to tilt all the time would actually translate well into mobile. So the third one was rope, which was, this was actually the strongest idea I had because one of my initial inspirations was the whole kind of spelunking cave exploring experience in Terraria, and rope was one of the tools you could use to navigate. So this one was actually the only ability that was really changed from the initial brief, my initial plans anyway. My initial design was the idea of aiming the rope kind of like you would aim your sling or trebuchet in Angry Birds, the whole kind of drag and release control scheme. Eventually that was kind of too difficult for me to implement, so I scaled it back to a tap and shoot version that we see today. So as for balancing, it was essentially a lot of trial and error. I tested the game consistently throughout the entire development process, and I just essentially tweaked as I went. Most of the changes to the game in terms of balance was actually done after I ported my game to mobile. Because mobile has different controls and therefore different considerations were brought up. I play tested the game with different people, and they found that simply jumping on platforms was harder than usual because of the tilt controls. Eventually, I had essentially realized that I was kind of building more from my skill level. So with the help of external testers, essentially scaled down the difficulty of the level to suit more of a general demographic, which I guess suits the casual market that the game's aiming for. So for the development process, I had a very strong concept from the start. As you can see in my initial blog, I illustrated the core gameplay and power-ups there. So before this, my experience in Unity was very minimal. So a lot of my problems in terms of development was actually due to my lack of understanding of Unity programming and C# in general. So obviously a lot of dev time was spent learning, looking, and finding tutorials. It's very easy to find tutorials of stuff near to what you want to do, but the problem is it's not exactly what you want to do. So a lot of my time was essentially kind of modifying and building upon and iterating upon existing tutorials to make something the way that I had envisioned it. So for example, the rope mechanic was probably the most complex thing in the game, and I couldn't exactly find a tutorial on how I wanted it to be done, but I found a tutorial for a Spider-Man web-slinging game, so essentially I had to modify that code and work from that. As for strengths in the development process, I felt like because of the very strong core concept and vision, my end goal was pretty clear from the start. I knew what I needed to do. It prevented me from feature creeping, which might have slowed the project down even more. I had clear milestones for the project, which was essentially the power-ups, sorting out building blocks, and making a tutorial level. I felt like because I was doing this to kind of learn Unity programming and mobile programming, I got better at that stuff as I went on, and I did plan the project to be like that. So the first things I programmed was simple character movement and the parachute, which was pretty simple. And later on, obviously, I dealt with the rope, which was more complex. Um, as for weaknesses, I felt like because it was a learning experience for me, it meant I wasn't as efficient in getting things done. Everything was new to me in this project. So a lot of the time I would spend ages researching and making very little progress, even for simple stuff, like timers, and that took way longer than expected. Um, Another weakness was I felt that I could have tested the game better. I mentioned this before, but my testing was kind of sporadic and on the whim, and I just tested throughout the project instead. And while I did catch most bugs, I felt that I would have saved a lot of time if I created, for example, test plans or test cases instead. Overall, I felt that the development process went really well. It was stressful, but it was a really good learning experience. I felt that mobile integration was pretty easy, at least in terms of simple taps, because in Unity, taps correlate to clicks, which really helped. I didn't have to do any gesture programming, which was a relief. I ended up having time to implement menus and sounds, which I didn't really expect. Menus just added some accessibility, and sounds really added a lot of finish to the game, because audio feedback is very important, in my opinion, for platformers or very gameplay focused games. On the final product, I feel like the prototype was successful. It achieved what I wanted, and it showed that the control scheme that I envisioned did work for mobile, and playtesters really liked it. They really liked the minimalist style, and I felt that it added a lot to the game feel without wasting too much time on art asset production. I felt like the gameplay itself was very strong and very simple. I felt like I balanced it pretty well, and I felt like I kind of reduced the input lag as much as possible, which is very important for platformers. I feel like the tutorial I made was very intuitive. A lot of people got what each thing did anyway, but I felt like the floating text really helped with clarifying if there was any other misconceptions. As for recommendations and improvements and future plans, that kind of stuff, I feel like the prototype itself has a lot of promise. It's essentially a core foundation now, and it's very easy to build upon. So, for example, new power-ups could have been made. I had an initial idea of jump boots, which essentially allowed double jump, which was pretty easy to implement. But that could be something that can be easily done in the future. An improvement I'd certainly work on would be having a second look at the rope mechanics. I feel like in the current version, while it does work for the prototype and for the goals of the project, I feel like a lot more could be done with it. Namely, making it like the way I had envisioned and designed it before. This was probably due to my lack of programming knowledge, so with more time or a team, we could certainly possibly rework the system. Obviously, there's lots of graphical hitches that where you can see stuff when you've passed them when they should be under shadow. This has to do with the plugin. I think the Pro version allows you to cull and hide things behind shadow, so it might be simply as buying that. As for future plans for mobile, I had envisioned kind of a saga-like level selection screen. As for monetization, maybe simple cosmetics like skins or changing the player's light could work. Obviously, as from the GDD, I'd like to implement other level types like, when the boulder chases you, even adding more hazards or actual enemies like bats could very well work and would be the next step in the project. But yeah, this is my post-mortem. Thanks for listening. I know it was long, guys, but yeah, bye.